facilitation is something often overlooked and not expected or thought about by technical professionals. And yet it is the skill set that unlocks your capability as you navigate through any organization or any customer situation.
Well, what then is facilitation?
The Latin root of the word facilitate is to make things easier, to render less difficult. That's the root of the term. And I really love that definition because whose job doesn't require you to be able to make it easier for your product to get designed, for you to sell it to the customer, for you to influence even when you don't have authority? Here's a couple things I would recommend. The first is when you're trying to convey complex information and English is your second language, you have to be much more concise, fewer words to make your point, because your words are going to have more impact. It's not about more words, it's about fewer words that get to the heart of your point. The second thing I would work on is practice. I think the biggest mistakes I've always made, there's a theme of my mistakes. And the theme is that
Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is Therese Miclot. Therese is a leadership consultant and co-author of the Facilitation Advantage, a practical guide for leaders seeking to enhance their confidence, communication, and influence. Hello, Therese. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Newton. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise. Therese, for anyone watching this who might not be very familiar with you or the work you do, could you, in your own words, just introduce yourself and give us a brief sense of your mission?
Sure. Yes. So I have 25 years of experience working with technical leaders on how to help them improve their impact. My focus is primarily where technical experts are the go-to people on their domain, and they find themselves in the need to now lead teams, influence decision makers, and I'm the person they call when they're now needing that set of skills to reduce bottlenecks, increase effectiveness in terms of how they communicate, and get things done through others.
Okay. And your facilitation support or teaching that you offer is for leaders in the tech space as well as professionals, engineers from entry level to mid level, or do you have like a small subsection of people that you address?
No, it's really any technical leader, and then that could be an individual contributor who is, someone that has a main role on a project, to senior executives. And I find that facilitation is something often overlooked and not expected or thought about by technical professionals. And yet it is the skill set that unlocks your capability as you navigate through any organization or any customer situation.
Well, what then is facilitation, Therese?
Yes, it's one of those words that I think most people think, oh, that's not for me. I'm not a facilitator, or that's someone who does a professional meeting, leader. And the book dispels that myth because the Latin root of the word facilitate is to make things easier, to render less difficult. That's the root of the term. And I really love that definition because whose job doesn't require you to be able to make it easier for the product to get designed, for you to sell it to the customer, for you to influence even when you don't have authority. And so that's why this book was written. It wasn't for the professional trainer. It was for the everyday tech leader who is frustrated because they're trying to get more accomplished through others and they're running into bottlenecks.
Interesting. And we're going to delve into the book a little bit later in the show as well. But just at a very high level, Therese, from the explanation you've just shared, I'm getting this understanding that facilitation is way more than just enabling meetings to happen.
Yes. Yes.
Is there like more you could maybe more to add to that other than meetings? So what could that be like? Could that be like, I don't know, running projects? What else should people be thinking about when they consider facilitation today?
I'll give you a real example from a conversation I had with a tech leader last week. And they were running into a problem where, because they are the expert in their domain and they have to work with product marketing and sales and other functions. And the problem is that they're not communicating effectively to those audiences. Those people are confused. He's talking over their heads. He's using technical language that's not making sense to them. And it's creating friction between his engineering team and product marketing and sales. And so the skill that we use pulled from the book is how do you communicate to different audiences? Because it isn't a one size fits all. He was certainly, capable of communicating very technical concepts when he was in his design team and in his engineering role. But he had to learn how to be more concise when he was presenting to the senior executives asking for more headcount. He needed to be able to convey that in a way that a senior leader who doesn't have the same background could understand it and buy into it. And so I find that that's a problem often for technical leaders, that they're running into these friction points with people. And one of the things from the book is how you communicate to different audiences.
Does this expand beyond just mastering the art of speaking? Maybe negotiating, having maybe good vocabulary. I'm trying to really see how the tech lead, for instance, that we have as an example.
Yes.
What was the learnable skill he was able to learn, which now enabled him to, reach out to the senior management teams or the other teams, as you mentioned, to communicate his idea properly. And also, one, I'm looking to see if these are actually learnable skills, one. And secondly, do they last for a long time? Or is it like a project by project base? He has to learn how to use it this one time and have to learn every time he has to approach different projects?
The good news is that, yes, of course. The good news is that these are evergreen skills. And so they can be applied to any situation you're in. The key is being able to listen more effectively to and read the audience more effectively, and then know what are my choices in terms of how I communicate with them. So, but I'll give you the specific example. So what did I work on with this technical leader? The first thing is we broke it down and we started with, okay, what is the information you're trying to convey? What's the outcome you're wanting, specifically with senior executives? And what he wanted was a larger budget, basically. And so he was putting together this big deck of slides and, evidence and, the research around why they needed to invest in this new feature and functionality. And we put that aside. The first thing we did was, okay, so who are you speaking with? All right, senior executives. Okay, what are senior executives going to care about? Like, put yourself in their shoes first. And he said, well, I don't interact with this audience a lot. So I get very nervous. And I get twisted up in my words. So we started with, how do you manage your mindset, your self-talk? And so what he was saying to himself before these meetings was, don't screw up. They're not going to understand this. What if they think that I don't know what I'm talking about? And all these things in his mind that were impacting how he showed up. Because if you think about it, Newton, like if you're saying to yourself, don't screw up, you better not mess up. How do you think anyone would feel? What would be your feelings if you think, don't screw up? You would probably be nervous, right? You'd be unsure. You'd maybe have a little anxiety. Well, imagine that technical leader coming into a room where he's trying to influence decision makers, and his nervousness is going to show up in a few ways. And what are those ways? He's going to talk very, very fast. He's going to not pause and wait for questions because he's just thinking like, just let me get through these slides. Just let me get through these slides. So he wasn't creating any space for any interaction. And so as that's happening, these senior leaders are starting to have more doubts because his speed and rate of his speaking is really fast and hurried, and he looks nervous. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then what will happen is those senior executives are now going to be like, wait a second, go back on that slide. And they may ask more pointed questions because you're giving signals, this person is giving signals that he's not confident. And so the first thing we worked on is you've got to manage the voice in your head. Then you've got to put yourself in the shoes of who are you trying to influence? Not what you're trying to do. What are they going to be motivated by? And what he knew was that this was a company that was looking for a lot of acquisition targets. So here's a bunch of senior leaders who are already thinking about the investment they need to make in new acquisitions, and he's asking for more money. So now he's got to be more cognizant of they're trying to manage their investments, and how is he going to be able to be influential, and why his ask is not going to take away from the investments they're going to need to make. That's the practical shift you have to make when you're rising as a technical leader that, otherwise you probably wouldn't have to think about or consider until you start to get promoted and in higher stakes meetings.
I have seen this happen often where you've got the technical professionals not having English as their first language, and the management or senior management or the decision makers, they speak fluent English. Then a lot of that self-doubt, all those voices in their heads you mentioned, might just be about the language itself and worrying about not being understood because they're not choosing the right word to use at the right time. And I don't know if this is answered in the book or if you have an answer for this, but this is me just going to some really deep problems that are popping to mind. Is there anything we could say to such people who do not have the English language as their first language, but they're very brilliant and very intelligent on the technical side, probably the best in the company, but they are just unable to convey that knowledge to anybody else in a second language? What do we say to these people?
Certainly. I've been in global roles in my career. And so I've worked with quite a few leaders where English was the second language. And here's a couple things I would recommend. The first is when you're trying to convey complex information and English is your second language, you have to be much more concise, fewer words to make your point, because your words are going to have more impact. It's not about more words, it's about fewer words that get to the heart of your point. So that's one thing I would work on, is conciseness. The second thing I would work on, and that I do coach technical leaders on with English as a second language, is practice. So you have to hear, and sometimes that even record yourself, but there's real science behind hearing your own message and voice to then be understood, to be clear, how are you perceived? I worked with a fair number of people who their self-talk was, my English isn't good, my English isn't good, when in fact, it was perfectly fine. It was their self-talk that was getting in their way and made them feel less assured. And how did we work on that? Well, we practiced, we got feedback, and so that we could really get at what's the real thing we need to work on here. Is it your pace, your choice of words, or is it your self-talk?
That makes a lot of sense.
Can I give you one more idea?
Yes.
Get good at asking questions. And here's why. If you can draw people out, as opposed to just talking at people, two things happen. One, it gives you a moment to rest. So you don't have to find the words. You can listen, right? It gives you a little bit of space to then maybe take a breath, catch your breath, now make it more interactive. So that's one. And by the way, when you make it more interactive, you can start to understand, are people following me or are they confused? The second thing is when you pause and you ask questions, you show up as more confident. Because talking very fast or rapidly or trying to get through all your points on a slide before you pause and ask doesn't send the signals of confidence. And otherwise, it could, most people in the room will be like, couldn't this be an email? If you're just going to talk at me, I think I could have just read this. So the balance to feeling like you have to be even more skillful in the English language is balance it with more listening.
I'm sure quite a lot of people watching this would find that useful. Mm-hmm. It's not about being the most articulate person to be able to convey your message properly.
Yes.
On the other side, though, Therese, there might be people watching this who actually have English as their first language,
yes.
But they're new to this concept of facilitation and they're unsure whether they are good facilitators or not. Therese, how can someone self-assess and decide if facilitation training or education can benefit them? How can someone tell if they are a bad facilitator?
Yes. So, of course, you can just directly ask people for feedback, but we make it very simple. So we have a free self-assessment, and it's available to everyone on the book website, which is thefacilitationadvantage.com, all one word. And there you'll see that we break facilitation down into 10 skills. And what I always do when I'm coaching technical leaders is we're not going to work on all 10. That's too much. We're going to pick the 1 or 2 or 3 skills. Maybe it's storytelling. For instance, a lot of ways you can convey technical information to people who are not at the same technical level as you is through analogy, through metaphor, through a story. That's instantly a way to get people to listen to you. So maybe it's storytelling, maybe it's presence, how you engage when you're working with more senior people to match their status so you show up with more confidence. Maybe it's keeping on track. So I don't know about you, Newton, but I've been in my fair share of meetings that just go off track. They go too long.
Yeah.
I was just coaching a leader last week, and he said the meeting was supposed to be 4 hours. We got so off track that we had to add an extra 2 hours to the meeting. And I'm like, wow, I bet people weren't super happy about that. An extra 2 hours to complete what you needed to. And so that would be my gift to all the listeners is go find that free assessment on the website, and that will give you a starting point.
So let's speak to facilitators. Let's say a good facilitator who's probably recently learned the art of facilitating projects, meetings properly, is able to get the job done. And, good facilitation comes into play in certain roles that have to do with things like project management, maybe some business analysis where you always have to pull people together and make them work together, collaborate towards a common goal. Now, the question I have here, Therese, is with these lessons learned initially, it might function for some time. 2 months, 3 months, let's say a year, you're able to get people to work together. But in these large corporations, after some time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, everyone gets familiar with you, the facilitator, and all your tricks, if I can call it that, because they realize that every time they come on meetings, they always leave with action points, work to do, sometimes things they would rather avoid doing. Because let's be honest, sometimes there's some work that gets pushed aside in large corporations for months. just because some professionals do not want to work together. They know what has to be done, but they need someone to come bring them together and, steer things in the right direction. It's easy for a facilitator to get that done. Probably the person will be praised for some time, but after some time, give it a year, 2 years. There is this thing where a facilitator might just say hello to someone in that large organization and here comes this facilitator again. I'm going to get an extra workload.
Oh, I guess I would want you to think about the skills differently. Then they're not always tied to a formal role. Meaning, anytime we're in a meeting, Therese is going to be the facilitator. Anyone can be a facilitator when you're better at listening to people, not giving tasks, not always even running the meeting, because it's more than that. And so I guess here's how I would think about it. So I guess let me ask you this: do you like to bake?
Bake?
Do you bake?
You mean
like bake?
I wish I could. I don't know how to bake, but I like to cook though.
Okay, so in most baking recipes, let's say we're making a cake. There's usually an ingredient in this cake that is baking soda. And baking soda is a leavening agent in a cake. And so could you make a cake without the baking soda? Yes, you could. But you would notice something's missing. And you might not even be able to put your finger on it, but something's missing. Because facilitation skills are a leavening agent. And it's not always tied to a formal role. But think of it this way. If you're better at reading the room, if you're better at listening under the surface to be able to draw out what's not being said in this meeting, but everybody's feeling, if you're better at being able to distill the essence of a conversation that just happened, those are skills that brand you as someone who is a leader, not as like the person, oh no, here she comes, she's going to give me assignments. If anything, sometimes a person with these skills will say, wait a second, we're jumping too quickly to action items, and we haven't even really talked about what are we trying to solve for. So a facilitator, this is back to making it easier, not adding more necessarily formal structure or, holding people accountable to things. You're the activating agent to better conversations. And I will tell you this. So in my 25 years of teaching these kinds of skills, there's not a single person that hasn't said that it has helped them over the course of their career. And why? Because when you're a better listener, people tell you more things. When you're a better communicator, people want to engage with you more. They want to bring you into their teams. They see you as someone that has more potential and capability, and just someone who's like, you get me because you're listening to me. So I would detach your thinking of it as a formal role. I mean, certainly there are people who have that formal role, but we're talking about the baking soda in every meeting. And you can do this from any seat in the room. This doesn't have to be tied to someone who's holding the formal, facilitator hat at any given moment. Does that make sense?
No, that's kind of a light bulb moment, because I speak for myself, and I'm sure quite a few watching this that we've gotten stuck with this idea of a facilitator as the person that chairs the meeting, and
yes,
and shows things run smoothly. So from your explanation, facilitator, a good one could be a team player, just someone who plays along but meets both their own personal goals as well as the goal of the organization at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, Newt. You are facilitating this conversation right now. You're asking really curious questions. You're very articulate in how you're framing this up for your listeners. Like that's facilitation. It's in every interaction. And it's not tied to a meeting per se.
That makes perfect sense.
You just think of it like in every interaction, you can be the baking soda. You can be the activating agent. It's a force multiplier for your effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, people will want to work more with you if you're better at listening, if you're better at communicating information, if you're better at reading the signals that people give you, all the nonverbal signals that they're not bought in or they're upset. And oftentimes, if you're technically focused on, presenting the solution, you're not paying attention to like, how are people reacting to my idea? And that's facilitation. So back to your question of, is this only good for a couple years? Is there only a shelf life, so to speak, for these skills? I'd say no. I've been in enough technical talent review meetings. So when we're talking about succession planning, who could become a principal engineer? Who could become the chief technology officer? And we're looking at technical talent. Certainly, the first requirement is the domain expertise, subject matter expertise, always. But it is not enough. It's just not enough. When you are not now going to need to, present your findings, or the salespeople want you to be in front of the customer because they want you to also speak to their engineers. So it's not a nice to have. It's an essential skill set to have if you want to be more effective at influencing and communicating and collaborating with people.
No, that makes perfect sense. I understand that you also help with maybe some professionals that feel stuck in some mid-level role, looking to progress somehow with some of these facilitation skill sets that you enable them to have.
Yes.
From your experience, if there is one most common skill you have seen that professionals tend to lack, which keeps them stuck in a job rut, in some job they do not like and they've been there for months, maybe years, what would that skill set be?
It goes back to the skill of managing the voice in your head. And because it is a skill like learning to ride a bike or learning to cook. And the fact of the matter is, the messages we send to ourselves can sometimes be limiting beliefs or hold us back from things. So a perfect example, I work with a lot of women in tech and women in engineering. And sometimes their limiting belief is, well, I can't apply for that job because I don't have every single skill set that's listed on the job description. So what do? They talk themselves out of even applying, when maybe that job would have considered them as a strong candidate, even though they didn't have 100% of the skill sets. Or the limiting belief of like, what, I'm never, this group is impossible to work with. Or, who am I? Like I'm working with all these other brilliant people that I see as, admire because of their technical skill. Who am I? And so when you think that way, you show up in the meeting with less confidence. Maybe you're not speaking as much. You're not contributing in the meeting because the voice in your head is like, I'm nowhere near as technically strong as these other people in the room. I'll give you a specific example. So I'm working with a very high potential engineer in a globally recognized company that everybody would know this company. And he was promoted exceptionally fast because he is, again, a technically brilliant person. And so now he's in this very high level role, 3 levels down from the CEO of one of the largest companies in the world. And he struggles because he's younger than all of his peers by a decade at least. And he has seen all of these people who have lots of accolades and certificates and letters, after their name. And the thing I'm working with him on is this self-confidence of, this kind of belief that he has, which is like, I don't belong here. Or, what if I make a mistake? And that's
Imposter
preventing
syndrome.
him. Exactly. And so that's a long way of answering your question, but it is the number one skill that you have to start to work on, because I can help you show up with executive presence. I can help you shape your, presentation to be much more impactful. But if we don't start inside out first, it won't matter. So that's the number one skill.
There is this thing, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which tends to impact a lot of skillful people, especially in the tech space.
Yes.
It happens on both sides of the coin, where you got someone who is really technically skilled in whatever they're working on, but they just tend to doubt their capabilities. Conversely, you have someone who has no knowledge, but they're very loud and they speak a lot, and they're able to deceive everyone listening that they're actually technically skilled.
Yes.
But having that solid mindset, and this is to the viewers, just building that rock solid conviction in your capabilities and unshakable confidence would make you, I think, the number one facilitator. I'm just trying to shorten this for anyone listening. If there's one skill set you just need to really go hard at, that would be, building your mindset up from the ground up to be able to communicate properly with confidence in yourself and in your knowledge, right? This is my huge takeaway from your message, Therese.
Yeah.
And I assume the book, The Facilitation Advantage, it helps the reader to build this self-confidence. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. It's one of the very first chapters, because again, everything emanates from the voice in your head. So yes, it's written to be very practical. It's, in language that everyone can understand. And again, we were thinking as we wrote the book that we're writing for people who are not professional facilitators, and they don't want to be. They just want to be good at being able to influence, being able to communicate, being able to be seen as someone that has credibility and confidence. And so that's what it's written for.
We have a tradition on the show where we just try to learn from the guests. If there is a biggest mistake you've made in your entire career, could be a biggest, if there's anything like a biggest mistake, maybe a most significant or most impactful mistake that you made. And if there's one such mistake you would like to share with the audience and maybe the lesson you learned from it.
Yeah. I think the biggest mistakes I've always made, there's a theme of my mistakes. And the theme is that I didn't act fast enough. That I would, I tend to be an analytical person, which is why I think I make a good coach to technical people. And I have delayed decisions, and some of them have been about my career. Some of those delayed decisions have been, deciding on a course of action. And I've had to fight against that tendency for analysis paralysis, like overthinking and waiting too long. And so it's probably my biggest lesson over the course of my career, that and the mantra that I keep for myself is don't let perfect get in the way of good enough.
I like that. My understanding is if someone is trying to really get to learn what good facilitation is all about, from what you have said, one, they could get that book. Two, they could sign up for a program you have. Could you maybe expand on that just a bit on your website?
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple. So one, I work individually with technical people who may have even gotten the feedback that their career is going to be stalled if they don't learn how to communicate more effectively with different audiences. So I work one-on-one and I coach technical people with very real feedback and practice with me. It's very fast, it's very targeted, it's immediately useful, because then your next meetings, you're going to be more effective at communicating with different audiences. So I coach there. I also do workshops inside of organizations for technical leaders on learning different styles of people. And knowing your self style and other styles helps you get ahead with those people because you learn how to shift your behavior. And so it's very evidence-based, and it's a really impactful workshop, particularly with intact teams and teams that need to be higher performing and interact really effectively with cross-functional people. So I work directly inside companies. I also do one-on-one coaching independently of that.
And what is the best way for anyone to reach you who's looking?
So too, there's my personal website is theresemiclot.com. So all one word. And also through LinkedIn. So I post every single day on LinkedIn. And I'm speaking to technical leaders every single day on my posts. So I would encourage you to follow me, connect with me there. And again, if you want to reach out, you can DM me or you can reach me through my website.
Thank you so much, Therese, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Thanks again, Newton.
On that note, we bring this episode to an end. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and do follow our guest Therese on LinkedIn and on her website. And let's all learn what facilitation in 2025 is supposed to look and feel like. Until the next episode, cheers.